Welcome back once again to yet another game developer interview courtesy of Game Devs of Color Expo 2023. I am your host, the Purple Sharpie, and I happen to be here with an amazing interviewee, Ryan, the owner and studio director of Weathered Sweater. How are you doing, Ryan?
Hey, how's it going? I'm doing well. Just happy to be here again.
Happy to have you. I remember you were here last year. Now, unlike last year, I believe we have a completely different project to talk about, Skator Gator 3D. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so Skator Gator 3D is a project that we've been working on for a little while now. It's a sequel to our original game, Skator Gator. And it's a short 3D platformer, something that I think a lot of people have been becoming more interested in lately.
And you know what? Let's go ahead and skate straight to this trailer. Now, Ryan, obviously, this is not your studio's very first experience with Greenjamin. As you have previously stated, you made another project, Skator Gator, originally, which was more on the lines of a 2D game, right? It
Yeah.
was also created in Unity, just like this game, but it looked significantly different. What I'd
Yeah.
like to talk about here is I actually want to talk about and kind of give you an opportunity to explain why you opted, instead of making that same kind of like 2D horizontal-esque game, you opted to make it 3D and much more worldly feeling.
Yeah. I think the answer to that is that we were trying to expand our internal development horizons a little bit. I'd always made 3D games prior, and I had never really worked on something 3D. We had like an internal project that we wanted to, well, other than Paparazzi, which I released not too long ago, but we had like an internal project, a 3D project that we wanted to work on, but we didn't have the skills like really developed. Especially me as a creative director, I didn't really have the skills to direct something like that at the time. So we decided to switch over to 3D to get some experience kind of on the table there.
Interesting. Now, I suppose one of my secondary questions on that same vein is, did the fact that he was a gator, or specifically an alligator, kind of play into some of the expansion inside of the secondary sequel for the game? Because we see a lot more expansive look at the swamp that Greenjamin resides in. We see much more depth and how far he can take his skateboarding prowesses. Was there anything outside of obviously just the dimensions that you all had an opportunity to expand on inside of this project?
I don't really think we even gave it a second thought about why he was a why he was a gator or not. I think so original Skater Gator came from a prototype I did while I was in college, and one of my art friends, like one of my close art friends at the time, I was like, because there's just like boxes like sliding across the screen at the time, and one of my close friends was like, "Here, how about you make it this gator, and we'll call him Skater Gator." And at the time, I was just like, "Okay, let's do that." And then from there, usually my process just involves just kind of taking ideas to wherever they need to go. I don't I don't really spend too much time asking myself like, should this be different? Unless there's important consequences to those decisions. But sometimes you just want to make a
Very,
cute
very
gator.
understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And cute he is. In fact, he's not only cute and green, he also happens to be cute in a plethora of colors. Talk to us about the palette system inside of the game.
So while we were developing the game, we actually intended to make the game in a really short period of time. But we found that because of our relative inexperience, it was taking a lot longer, and the budget was getting a little bit larger for us. So we decided that once the budget kind of crossed a certain threshold, we just decided, okay, at this point, we need to put a little bit more time and investment into the game. So we kind of doubled the number of levels. And with that, we started putting it in front of playtesters. And they're like, oh, like I'd love it if there were skins and blah, blah, blah. Like we had a wish list of scope items. And because I also act as like producer on the project, despite like other than just being creative director. So I control the budget. But I was like, absolutely not. We are not doing all of this stuff. It's getting too expensive. But as the game kept getting like more and more polished, I was like, okay, we have to. Greenjamin needs friends. We need to put the skins into the game. So yeah, I'm not very good at
I
holding that purse, so to speak.
I completely understand. I have to ask, just out of respect to the community, do you happen to have a favorite skin?
I really like Gectoplasm, which is one of the like I think more difficult skins to unlock. So if you ever find them, or there's also Cyanthony.
I'm upset because you mentioned one of the only skins I actually don't have. As soon as you said it, I was like, that's crazy, because that's like one of the only ones I don't have unlocked. And immediately like disappointment on my face. But I do want to just give you all your props, because I feel as though the skin system inside of the game is something that kind of helps the player work towards a goal, which outside of just the completionist aspect of it, which I would love to talk about and expand a little bit more with you, as it's very obvious from a lot of the gameplay here, there seems to be a very, very similar vibe between this game and Sonic Adventures or Crash Bandicoot. Can you talk to us a little bit more about references that you may have taken from other games inside of this genre?
Yeah, so I would say that most of my personal inspiration for the games came from the tone implementation, so like tone, audio, kind of general vibe versus gameplay. Obviously, when you're building a game, especially a game with like an established audience and an established genre, there are sort of conventions that you want to hit. A lot of those conventions we actually put into that wish list thing, but then we ended up pulling them back in later when we realized, okay, the genre really does need those things. But I would say that my major inspirations are from some of the 3D platformers that I spent a lot of time playing as a kid. I didn't actually play too many 3D platformers. I ended up playing mostly like Sonic Adventure 2 on the Dreamcast, Sonic Adventure Battle on the GameCube. And so things like the vocal track that we decided we needed to put into the game was kind of inspired by that. Um, I that was like the first soundtrack that I ever had. My parents got it to me. I was like, I don't know, like 11, and I had like a little boombox inside the Sonic Adventure soundtrack, and I just would play it to sleep. So yeah, I needed that kind of stuff in the game. So most of my
It's a
inspirations
good
were,
one.
yeah, it's a great soundtrack. But yeah, most of my inspirations I'd say were like tonal more so than mechanical, at least
Let's
from
kind of
those
talk
old.
about that a little bit. I'm really happy you organically brought it up, and we'll get back to that organic pun I just gave, but I want to talk about the introduction song, Side to Side, that the player hears the moment that we open up the game. It's obviously an original song that was created exclusively for this project. It does not exist inside of the prequel to this game. It was very obviously created for this specific version of the game, and it talks very adamantly about how far Greenjamin is willing to go in order to accomplish his goal of succeeding and urging the mayor to stop polluting the swamp. Talk to us about the creation behind us, please.
I always find these stories really funny because making a game weird, right? Like we hadn't even really written the like, the quote unquote story. There is a small story in Skater Gator 3D, but we hadn't really like finalized the story. It was way more complicated when we started making the soundtrack. But all I knew before we started making the game, other than that Greenjamin was going to be in it and that there was grinding and that it might be 3D, was that I was going to make a vocal track. So I think it might have been one of the first songs that we made. So one of the level designers, Fisher, does the vocals, and then our audio person, Jack, who's done like audio for all of my games, even over at my other company, Sunday Month. Um, like we basically went, let's just make a vocal track. We need someone to do the vocals, and I reached out to Fisher because I knew that they had a band. And so back then we had an office before COVID and whatnot happened. and we were like, okay, let's just put Fisher in our like phone booth and have him record vocals. Like he came in overnight and was just like, yeah, let me jam out some vocals to this beat that Jack created, or like to this melody that Jack created. And so we didn't really even talk about it. He just went in there as one of the level designers, wrote some lyrics, came back, and at first, because I had actually never really heard Fisher sing before. So at first I was like, whoa, this is a different side of Fisher I haven't heard before. And we also made like a Vocaloid version of the track that is not, I don't think, in the game, with
Mm.
completely different lyrics. But we ended up like weighing the options between did we want like this really energetic song, like an actual vocal track, or did we want this Vocaloid track? And the team ended up almost unanimously voting for the uh the vocal track we have. There was a point where I liked the Vocaloid one better, but I definitely grew to love Side to Side. Like it's really hard. Like it gets stuck in my head all the time.
Side to Side is very, very, very infectious, and it aptly brings the player into the universe of the game. I want to expand on the point that I kind of mentioned earlier, the climate change and kind of save the earth vibe that Greenjamin has, because Greenjamin, as we've discussed, is a gator that happens to skate. He's a skater gator,
Yep.
and that punk track kind of talks like, the way I envision it, it almost feels like he's singing to me. Like he's singing about what he's trying to do and trying to accomplish, which
Yep.
is once again incredibly ironic because he is an alligator and he can't talk. And even
Yep.
inside of the game, he has no lines. He's not talking at all. So I think the song does a really good job of humanizing this character that we otherwise have no connection to. Otherwise, then he's a cute little small gator, and yeah, he wants to protect his swamp, and he's not an ogre. So we definitely want to protect the swamp. So it's really cute, but I'd love to talk a little bit more about that climate change aspect of it. Like I said previously, the storyline here is really that he wants to protect the swamp. He's going over to the mayor to show him why this pollution is affecting the swamp and to try to convince him to stop these things that are allowing the factory to just dump pollution inside of there. And he finds friends along the way, like eels, and he has to tackle all these creatures. But all of the methods that he uses to accomplish his means organically inside of the game are considered nonviolent. We don't see him killing the bugs. We don't see him actually using any of his mandibles or any of his claws to actually attack other animals. We only see him using props that are given to him, like the eel that then attacks the insects, or the skateboard that then runs over the insect, but he's not necessarily attacking it himself. Was that intentional inside of this game to kind of be like there are other ways to address your issues than just violence type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about it, or at least I like thought about this a little bit in terms of like what defines cartoon more serious violence. But with that in mind, I don't think we're really against radical violence. I would argue. Um, the plot of the game does involve a little bit of that. I mean, at the end
There
of the
are some
original,
spoilers inside of the game where there is actively a factory blown up, and several different opportunities for Greenjamin to get, I would consider, make sure that the enemy of the game gets their just desserts for sure. But
yeah,
I was just interested in why the nonviolent violence inside of the game, if that makes sense.
honestly, I think it's just I don't think it was a major decision we made about the gameplay. It's just kind of how things evolved. Because I mean, we had to, since it's a sequel to a game like another game we made, we had to spend a lot of time looking at what we ended up putting into that previous game, and we decided like not to really create too many new interactions. We just needed to try and translate as many of the ones as we could to bring it over from the other one. Like in the other one, there is like a little like you do get like a banjo, and you do like basically
Yes.
slap the enemies with like a banjo. Um, but no, I would say that it wasn't something that really came up. I think we focused more on like those discussions tended to focus more on like what he was doing in the story sequences and less in the gameplay.
That's fair. That's a totally valid answer. Thank you so much for expanding on that. My final question does actually have to do regarding something that you and your team submitted when you actually opted to join this expo. And I wanted to kind of talk about your ethos here. your main focus is advocating for making smaller games, and you want to make it so more consumers can confidently say that they want to see more small or 1 to 4 hour games.
Yeah.
In a world where AAA is expanding, creating open world everything, we're seeing people put hundreds of thousands of hours like Baldur's Gate or Diablo 4, or even inside of Destiny 2, we are seeing a kind of resurgence in smaller games, things that you can easily pick up, games that I would consider would be very easily made for portable games, such as like back when I was a kid, the Game Boy Advance or the Game Boy Advance SP.
Yeah.
Talk to me about why you and everyone at your studio lives by this ethos of creating smaller games.
So, I mean, when I got started, I was like really into like wanting to make larger games. And I think as you gain a little bit, like, okay, so to take a step back, actually, there is sort of a marketing, there's like a group of people who are like, okay, the only people who really want smaller games happen to be developers. Because, you know, the average gamer is someone who really wants to feel like they spent their 20, 30, $60 on something that was meaningful. But I think over time, I've kind of come to the conclusion that people don't find meaning in length. They find meaning in how
Mm.
satisfied they are with their experience. This is actually something that Tanya Short from Kid Fox told me or was talking to us about when we were releasing or like finishing development on
Mm-hmm.
Paparazzi, which is one of my other games. Um, she basically said that for short games, you really just need to make sure that they end, like the way that they end is satisfying. It doesn't really matter so
Mm-hmm.
much how long the experience is, so much as the player feels like you didn't like throw up a big middle finger at them at the end to tell them how short their game was or the game that they played was. You kind of want to like take them and hold them and tell them that this experience was like very personal and give them an opportunity to really be happy with what how they spent that time. And maybe because I'm a developer, I lean towards these shorter experiences. But I think as like you said, as people and games get longer and longer, there's definitely going to be a growing niche of people who just want to have something that doesn't through 30 hours of side quests or whatnot to get to the content that they actually want to play. And it's just like, okay, I can pick this up, I can play it, I can beat it, and then I can go on with my life.
For sure. I think you described it very, very aptly. And if I could bother you for one more question, I will. I want to know, is the low iteration time inside of this game, specifically like obviously when Greenjamin falls off a platform or when he doesn't quite land that ollie like he was trying to on that secondary pipe rail,
Mhm.
and we see that low iteration time coming back into the start. Was that also very intentional inside of this specific game? Was it very, very important to you to make sure that even though it was a short game, that the time period where a player is sitting there thinking about their mistakes is as low as possible so that we can enjoy more of it?
Yeah, so honestly, I don't think we thought too much about, oh, how does this reduce the length of the game? But what we definitely thought about was, I think there's like one vestige that of like old game design that's still in Skater Gator, which is like the hearts and like how
Mm.
like when you run out of hearts, you like die and go back to the last checkpoint. I think as we were developing the game, this is my first 3D platformer that I've ever like really worked on. That's like fundamentally a 3D platformer. As we were playing, I was just like, these grind rail sections can get kind of tough. And every time you died, you would get sent back to a checkpoint, which might have been, you know, a small, easy walking section away from trying it again. And we noticed that like even so in original Skater Gator, when you die, you like are immediately put at the back beginning of the level. And since everything is just grinding, it was like very quick. You could just keep trying. There was not really an opportunity for you to, unless you got really frustrated, there wasn't really an opportunity for you to like just stop playing. So like most people would kind of like grind through and just like finish the level, kind of regardless of difficult. Noticed that because of the way that we added the walking sections and the grinding sections, there was a lot more opportunity for a player to like bounce off of the game. And so through natural like game design iteration, we, or I guess I really pushed for reducing just how long it takes for you to get back on the rails or like get back to gameplay every time you die. And I think that it helps just keep players from bouncing off and being less frustrated. Because really, at the end of the day, the like walking section, so the parts where you're like not grinding, they're not that difficult, and they're more there to they're more there to feel like help you feel cool and allow you to like do more speed or like optimizations for like speedrunners, because like speedrunning on the rails is a little bit harder. So it was more of a design process than an intentional way to reduce the length of the game. It was just kind of incidental due to the way that the game plays.
Ryan, I want to thank you again for bringing me into the world of Skator Gator and opening my eyes to the beauty of the swamp and of this game. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and there's, I guess, one last thing that we wanted to talk about or bring up. So we will be
Oh,
releasing Skater Gator on Xbox later this year.
congratulations, that's huge news. Everybody, if you are a fan of everything green, be it alligators or swamps or our planet Earth, make sure that you grab the game right now on Steam and be sure to follow Weathered Sweater as they go through the development cycle for coming out with this game on Xbox. Everybody, that's going to do it for this game developer interview, but stay tuned for even more Game Dev with Color Expo 2023.